2020 presidential candidates are reacting to the departure of National Security Advisor John Bolton, while also criticizing President Trump. Senator Bernie Sanders tweeted, quote, "A symptom of the problem is gone. The root cause of authoritarianism remains." And Senator Elizabeth Warren said, quote, "The American people are better off with John Bolton out of the White House. The world will be better off when the man who hired him in the first place is out too." Joining me now is Marianne Williamson. She's a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate and an author. Thank you so much for stopping by Red and Blue. We really appreciate it. What are your thoughts on John Bolton no longer being the National Security Advisor?
Well, of course, I agree with Bernie and I agree with Elizabeth. I figure if he'll only fire Stephen Miller now, then I can sleep at night.
The president's domestic policy advisor, largely responsible for a lot of the immigration policy that's been pushed through. Recently, you told the Washington Post that you have been following the Afghanistan negotiations very closely. What are your thoughts about those secret and then now canceled talks with the Taliban that the president had planned for Camp David?
The Taliban is a brutal organization, and I think it was very inappropriate to be inviting them to Camp David. I understand that the negotiations are happening and the negotiations need to happen, but I thought it was quite inappropriate for them to be invited to Camp David, and I don't know why the president would be shocked that they killed people at a wedding. What, did he think they were a nice group of people? This is how they operate.
What would your approach to Afghanistan be? Do you support a troop drawdown?
Well, I think we all want to see the troops brought home, but as part of the negotiating terms, I have been disturbed by the absence of conversation around Afghani women. You know, long before 9/11, I'm one of the women in this country, and there were many of us deeply concerned about the brutal treatment of women at the hands of the Taliban. So I have always felt that as president, I would want to have a deep conversation with the women of Afghanistan about how they felt about all this. Because when the United States has been talking about its terms for withdrawal, there's been no conversation about Afghani women, and I have wanted to see that.
What would that actually look like, though? Because if you're sitting down with the Taliban to try to negotiate a peace, you're dealing with, of course, a group that has a certain view of women's place in Afghanistan society.
Well, they claim to be sort of the new Taliban, that they're much more liberal on that now than they used to be. Since 9/11, since there has been some liberation, women have come out of their homes, out of the horrible cave-like situation that they were in, at least in many parts of the country, not in all parts of the country. And women are back out, they're back out working in certain professions and so forth. And part of our terms should be, just like we were insisting that in order for our troops to leave, we want to know that certain groups such as Al-Qaeda would not be able to find a home there. It is absolutely reasonable that one of our terms would have to do with a guarantee about the safety of the Afghani women.
Do you think that your fellow Democrats have given enough thought to specifically how a troop drawdown might happen?
Well, I don't know. For me, I have not heard much conversation from other candidates. I'm certainly the only one I know of who's been talking about Afghanistan, and I think that there's been a surprising lack of conversation about foreign affairs, really much at all, except Tulsi Gabbard and I have talked about the over-influence of defense contractors on our national security agenda. And of course, Bernie Sanders was one of the leaders of the effort to get President Trump to stop the U.S. aerial support of the Saudi war in Yemen. Of course, the president vetoed that, and they weren't able to override the veto.
What would be some of the principles that would inform a Williamson foreign policy doctrine?
The same thing would inform my foreign policy as my domestic policy, and that is whatever would help people thrive. In terms of foreign policy, number one, we must restore America's moral leadership in the world. I met the Dalai Lama several years ago, and he told me that the people of the world no longer see the United States as a champion of democracy. What we do internationally is what we do domestically, and that's too often the bottom line of our policies have to do with advocacy for short-term profits for U.S. corporations than for people. I believe we should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. You know, when I was a child, I used to, and even a young woman, politicians used to talk about peace and prosperity They don't even talk about it anymore because it's not really the goal. If you want peace, you proactively wage peace. Just like you can't just take medicine, you also cultivate health. We can't just endlessly prepare for war. We also have to cultivate peace. That's why I want a United States Department of Peace.
How do you think lack of women at the negotiating table on foreign policy matters, for instance, affects outcomes?
Well, that's a perfect example. The 4 factors which, when present, indicate statistically that there will be a greater incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict are, number 1, expanded economic opportunities for women, reduction of violence against women, expanded educational opportunities for children, and an amelioration of unnecessary human despair. Every woman, 2 of those factors have to do with women, and all of those factors have to do with what any woman knows.
I want to turn to another topic. You have apologized for previously calling clinical depression a scam and acknowledged that that was wrong to say. Medical experts, though, and disability activists have criticized comments on mental health that you've made, and the director for the Center for American Progress's Disability Justice Initiative recently said this about what she says is your, quote, ongoing dismissal of the reality of mental illness and chronic health conditions. This is what she told The Hill, quote, while she may have some reasonable and common sense ideas on key issues, there is a limit to how much ableist rhetoric that the American people can take, and her legacy will be setting that limit. What's your response to that?
That's a political hit, and that's all that that is. I have a 35-year career working with people in crisis. I've done more to work with people dealing with mental trauma, I would assume, than that woman does. My entire career has been helping people deal with mental and emotional times of crisis and trauma. And the fact that I have questioned the overprescription of antidepressants in the United States, there are as many established mental health experts who have questioned the overprescription of antidepressants as there are those who have questioned the under prescription. So I stand by my 35-year career. I think I know something about working with people in mental trauma.
So I hear what you're saying about your experience. What would you say, though, to those people who might say, well, it is still hurtful when there is language that is used like that? There still appears
what
to be some
language did I use there that's hurtful? First of all, you quoted her language. You didn't quote my language. I don't know. I don't think that there's one thing I have ever said or one thing that I have ever written that underemphasizes the significance of trauma. I've written books about it. I have worked with people in trauma for 35 years. I've never said anything or written anything that undervalues the problem or is quote unquote hurtful.
Our time is running short. I do want to ask you about the issue of gun control. Some of the other Democratic candidates now support a mandatory assault weapons buyback. What do you think about that?
Anything we can possibly do. Absolutely anything we can possibly do.
As you probably know, gun rights advocates look at that as confiscation of the weapons that they are entitled to carry under the Constitution.
Well, we do have a Second Amendment right to bear arms, but what they're talking about mandatory buyback has to do with assault weapons. So the idea here is that once we get back the ban, once they are no longer legal, then what they're saying is that the millions that will already be on the street will then have to be come back. And that does make sense.
You do support, then, the notion of mandatory assault weapon buybacks?
What they're talking about there is the fact that if we bring back the ban and you can no longer buy them, then we're going to still have the issue of what are we going to do about the millions that are already on the street. One has to do with certain kinds of bullets that would no longer that you would need, that could no longer be available, that you would need in order to shoot them, and another has to do with mandatory buyback. We are living in a time of such crisis regarding gun violence in the United States. We need to do everything we need to do that is within the purview of respect for the Second Amendment, and I see that as an example.
So you will not be on the debate stage this week to talk about your views. How do you plan to qualify for the October debate?
Well, I will be people can go to Marianne 2020, and I will be right after the debate. I will be giving my own input, live streaming to anyone who wants to watch it.
This is during the debate or after the debate?
No, I wouldn't do it during. It will be right after the debate. I'm disappointed that I won't be in that debate. I hope I'll be in the next one. But, whether or not you get into a DNC debate is just one point in a long journey of running for president.
Are you satisfied with the rules with the DNC?
The DNC has their rules. Tulsi Gabbard, Michael Bennett, and myself, and others, I think, have express some concern. I believe that the role of an organization such as the DNC should be to facilitate the democratic process, not to dictate it. And my experience is that many people are just thinking about all this, really reflecting on this. For those of us who do not wish to see the president reelected, this is not just one of the most critical decisions of our lifetime. This is one of the most critical decisions in American history, who runs against the president. People have to think about this very, very deeply. I'm one of those people who thinks it's very healthy for the Democratic Party and very healthy for our democracy that so many people are running. These are good people with good ideas. We all have a lot of good things to say. The American people are not children. They can handle choices. And I believe that this conversation should just be opening up. This is not the time to shut it down. That's my opinion.
And if you don't make the October debate?
If I don't make the October debate, well, I'm in here on any given day that my heart says, get out there, talk about the things that matter. And as long as people are showing up and people are donating and people are saying, yeah, I'll be there, because I'm an American. And that's really the qualifications of the Constitution are the most important qualifications of all.
Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for joining us on Red and Blue.
Thank you.